In this episode of SENSimilla, we'll be chatting with Eli Harrington, one of my first friends within the Vermont advocacy scene. We first met at the Capitol in Montpelier, where we were both trying to start our careers in the cannabis industry. Eli began a local news organization called Heady Vermont, whose focus it was to discuss political and social happenings within the cannabis space. Along with his partner, Monica Donovan, Eli was able to grow Heady Vermont into a sizable organization, gaining significant momentum not only with their reporting, but their online traffic, their growing business directory, and also with their budding events industry. Partnering with groups like NECAN to put on trade shows and spearheading their own cannabis award shows, educational symposiums, and other business events. The co-founder relationship can be tricky at times. Ultimately, it didn't work out for Eli and Monica. Eli eventually left Heady Vermont, which has since shuttered, a direct result of the economic impact COVID has had. Eli is refocused and working on new paths forward. Firstly, through Vermontawana, which he hopes will fill the gap in local cannabis reporting that Heady Vermont left behind. In addition to news, he's focused on re-entering the event space and bringing back some of the community that has been left in ruins following the pandemic. Eli, my dude, my homie, my guy, welcome.
Thank you very much, Will. I'm honored to be here, and it's like you said, it's hard to believe it's been like 5+ years at this point since we first connected, and going back and looking at like old notes and old social media and like old emails and stuff. And, it was like people had different company names. And, for me, it was like before, I think that's when I was doing Vermontawana originally in 2015. And I, scored this.
That's how I first found you. That's definitely how I first found you. And, I can remember, actually, I think I met you at the Skinny Pancake, formerly. Like, I was like, are you? And you're like, yeah, are you? And I'm like, yeah.
Which is so funny because, like that's such a cannabis industry thing where you're like, especially growers, and you're like, oh, you're this handle, or you go to an event and you're like, oh, that's, Terpy Mama 507. Like,
right. God bless Terpy Mama 507, by the way. Shout outs.
No, absolutely.
Eli, I want to ask you something before we get into memory lane, or we'll be walking down memory lane the whole time, I'm sure. But I do want to kind of get into the business side of, your experience thus far doing this whole thing. So my first question is, why do Vermonters take Vermont so seriously?
Oh man, that's like a complex historical, sociological, anthropological question. But I think
let's go.
A lot of people, it is the idea that it's such a like mystified playground place, and this is really where a lot of people with money and time for leisure, have come. And and the locals, I've thought about this a lot, right? And so I think a lot of locals, one description of Vermont is poverty with a view, and
I've never heard that, but that's very apropos for sure. Definitely
well, so I think especially like people try to cling to this identity and take pride in it because it's like all these other people are valuing this identity of Vermont, the food, the views, the cannabis businesses, all that. But the people are kind of treated like, I think the term is charismatic megafauna, almost like part of the landscape or part of the attraction that you go see, like, oh, like, look, there's the rednecks over at the country store. And like,
there they are,
and so,
well, here's why I ask. That might be a weird, slightly loaded question from one Vermonter to another, one transplant to a native.
But I don't know if this was a setup to make me show my tattoo on my Vermont tattoo.
You do have a Vermont tattoo. It's true. Here's why I ask. So like something that you and I have not debated, but discussed probably to you ad nauseum is the local versus national. I was always, I am of the, the thought of like, don't limit yourself, like go big or go home. Like why, and a conversation you and I have always had, or we've had frequently is what's the balance between focusing on Vermont and applying it to a more national sort of thing. Right. I would just want, so
Yeah.
that's all
No,
to, that's all to say, like, that there's major respect in being able, for me to be able to, like, watching you, know exactly what you are passionate about, which is your community. Can you tell me a little bit about the community? What's,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I think you're right, and I think ultimately the takeaway for people is that you got to understand what's going on in your own backyard, and you have to understand sort of understanding the landscape and who's active and involved is going to make you more informed and be able ultimately, if you have national ambitions, international ambitions, it's going to be those experiences you learn from people around you are going to help inform that, especially in cannabis when so much of the knowledge comes from the, legacy market or, traditional or illicit, and people who have been doing it for a long time. And it's hard to get the trust and respect of a lot of those people, but they're the ones with a lot of the knowledge and not just how to grow it, but also how to describe it, how to market it, what makes it special and what makes it unique. I mean, as much as you have crazy conversations with growers, like who is better at describing cannabis, than people who grow it and telling you why it's special and unique. So if you're somebody who's trying to interpret that to a larger audience, you have to, I think to me, it's part of knowing the industry, knowing the plant, knowing what's happening in your own backyard. And part of it, I do think that there is sort of a philosophical like respect mandate, and that we are really kind of building this in a legal above board way on the backs of a lot of people who came before us who, it took a lot of guts to advocate for cannabis 10 years ago, 5 years ago, in some places, even now to get out there and put your face out. And, a lot of people who we know still are hesitant to do it. So, I think that it's good practice and it's easy,
well, here is the thing that I kind of want to get into, which is like, so for me, I don't want to, you are an advocate. You know what I mean? Like you were down in the trenches doing it. I myself consider, I'm like a weekend advocate. Not that I take it any less seriously, but it was hard for me to, I sometimes felt like an imposter a lot of times. I don't want to diminish anything I may have impacted, no matter how small it is, but that's kind of how I felt, right? You, on the other hand, had serious relationships with politicians. And for me, part of it, the advocacy thing, while very near and dear to my heart, part of it was a social aspect too. So like,
right.
Once these legalization bills started happening, once you started to kind of, build the soapbox, the advocacy soapbox that you would stand on and yell from, this community started to gather who, and were it not for you, I don't think it would have happened the way it did. But, for me, I was able to meet people who were entrepreneurial, who had obvious legalization goals, but also business goals. Like there was a means to an end here. There's huge social justice implications, but they're looking to maybe build a life around it once legalization happens. Did you kind of set out with that intent, or was it just like there
are
surprising?
No, man. Well, there are two things, and it's funny because pre-cannabis, I worked for 7 years, coordinating diplomatic exchange programs. And my degree is in international studies. I speak a couple languages. I was doing international media and working with State Department and USAID. So like cultural interpretation has always been my jam, and cannabis has always been my culture, in Vermont cannabis. And I realized pretty quickly that part of the problem with cannabis advocacy is that there's a lot of motion, but not a lot of traction. And my value to the people in the cannabis community was that I had these polished political skills. I had some connections and contacts. I knew my way around the process. And so the best way for me to help the cannabis community was to go be the dude that put on the suit and said, all right, here's what's going on, in the process. If you're going to make a phone call, you should do it during this week when this committee is talking about this subject, and vice versa. The things that I'm talking about and advocating for from a cannabis perspective, they're all informed by, the OGs and the medical patients and the people who have like, gone totally crazy because they've been yelling this stuff into the void for 30 years and they've been totally correct this whole time, but nobody's listened to them and they haven't been given the platform. So like, I'm a bald white guy in a very white state, and I had connections and contacts, which were earned from, working at a chamber of commerce and leading hundreds of visitor tours through the state house, and having a degree in international studies and media and all this. So like, but cannabis was always kind of my community. And so it was clear that the bell was ringing and that it was time for, cannabis to be represented in a serious way in the political conversation. And that was like when we hooked up in like 2015, the whole Vermont Cannabis Collaborative coming together, like there was a glide path and there was a path towards more credibility. And that's when, to me, I looked around and said, okay, like these are the people who I speak their language, the suits, I know these people and they're business people and they're cool, whatever. And great. But like, I don't know if these people really are good, are to be trusted. And I don't know if they're really going to represent the cannabis community I know, which is patients and OG growers and, really kind, compassionate and brilliant people. So that was kind of the call for me, was like, it's time for me to use my skill set and my access to this network and, spice it up a little bit more and bring in all my crazy, passionate friends and tell them, hey, we're going to storm the Capitol on the
clip. Took that clip.
Well, it's funny because credit to you, Will, because you did come up with the first cannabis in the Capitol was a direct inspiration of that was your idea, putting in touch with this representative to represent the cannabis industry in a legitimate way. So we did before it was taboo or cool, depending on how we started out there. Before it was historically notable, we had a group
before people were getting arrested for it.
Selected, yeah. So no, but I mean, really, man, that's kind of a big thing with cannabis is that cultural interpretation, right? How to do it well, because it goes both ways. When you're marketing a cannabis product to baby boomers, calling it Alaskan Thunderfuck and talking about the terpiness and talking about the whatever, that's not as compelling as maybe talking about like the organic growing conditions or the family farm or Aunt Judy who, uses this for her arthritis, whatever. Right. So
I think we were at a very interesting point in time where there was a far greater understanding of the plant than there was a decade ago. Add to that, to me, it seems like it seems like it was inevitable, right? Like this was going to happen whether we were at the Capitol or not. But I think that the context
part, the media part is, I think, the other important part of this too, is because think about what cannabis media was, 6 or 7 years, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Think about what it is now, with just how much more activity there is, good, bad, and otherwise, and segmented and whatnot. But a lot of the way cannabis was being talked about in mainstream media coverage was still using stupid puns, and very diminishing and dismissive. So like we needed to have an extra serious voice. And that's part of, I think cannabis advocacy is that like, you have to overcompensate for these stupid biases.
Sorry, as you said that, my phone rang. I'm gonna turn on Do Not Disturb. Ruin the podcast. We'll cut that out.
No worries, dude.
What was I gonna say? So I'm kind of curious, because we do like to talk about, the entrepreneurial journey. I'm curious about that moment of, I don't know if it was a moment or like you knew it all along, or it was a slow burn from, being a government liaison. So from your past life into kind of jumping into this thing. Because when I met you, you were already pretty much full in. You were pretty much, supporting yourself, being at the Capitol building. So I kind of take me there.
Yeah, man. I I had, come back to Vermont and done some nonprofit work as executive director of a nonprofit. And then I left that to go pursue a more creative path and started doing video stuff full time. My friend Julian, super talented videographer, Juharo Productions, he kind of put me on, and I got back into shooting video.
Hold on. Nope. Sorry, Eli.
Okay. That's okay, man.
I wanted to, I just like, it didn't seem like I was recording. I'm a pro. Dude,
sorry, I know the struggle. I can empathize more than most. So that's fine,
I know. If anybody gets it, it's you.
I'll go from the answer because I have a good answer for this. So, I mean, I had kind of already left the sort of professional white collar world, right? I'd moved back to Vermont and had done, taken a gig as a nonprofit executive director. That was going cool, but I just wasn't as passionate. And I ended up getting back into video. My friend Julian, Juharo Productions, super talented guy. He put me on, gave me a few gigs and let me kind of relearn how to shoot and edit. And I got involved with this collaborative in 2015. I was trying to pitch them to make a documentary about Vermont's legalization process, because I thought that we were starting it in the fall of 2015 and it was going to be over in some sort of short term, or that I could get paid to make, or that I could get paid to make some video that was like advocacy, media for like legalization campaigns, which I did end up doing, not getting paid for it, but being involved in that. So, having video as a skill, that was huge for me because that let me freelance, that let me get into cannabis, that gave me a reason to do it. And then that's sort of what tied into the media part, because then I had sort of a reason and a product to sell, right? And so ultimately what I figured out very early on and what motivated me was just the information. What's going on with cannabis, legalization here? Is it happening? What are the laws going to be? Because it was happening politically, those were relevant questions to answer. And so I was lucky to be able to make that transition. And, I studied videography in college. It pays to have some hard skills. I do technical writing, and people out there who do graphic design, who do photography, who do all these things, like if you can do them at a certain level, and you're gigging already, then I think it's easier to get into cannabis because you're bringing a hard skill to the table.
100%. I mean, look who you're talking to. I couldn't agree with you more. Like there was little to no chance that the story of me getting into cannabis had anything to do with touching the plant or, because that's not me. I don't know stuff. But applying, and I think that's a really important point of, it's not always the plant that gets you in the door. It's usually what you're already doing. I had a similar conversation with Tito from the Burn Gallery, who you know very well, who said something that was like the perfect clickbaity title ever, which was "Don't do what you love, do what you're good at," which I think is right. It's like, no, oh my God, like, yeah. So you'll be able to incorporate what you love with what you're good at. And I think that's such an important lesson for anybody listening to this who's like thinking about where they fit into this. It's like, well, what are you already doing? What are you already good at? Chances are it's applicable to cannabis.
And with cannabis, I do think people get intimidated because there is like that cultural boundary, and there are people who are protective, right? They've been doing it for a long time and they're wary of competition and people coming in and, the whole suits versus roots fake dynamic thing. So like, I think people are hesitant to get involved even with advocacy because they don't want to seem like posers, but it's like, if you're sincere, you're helping, you're speaking to maybe a different audience. Like we need more soccer moms and hockey dads and, other identifying gender people who speak to totally different crowds. Like all of these people are cannabis people. It's just a question of who's speaking to them. And again, that was part of one of the business motivations for us, was that I wasn't sure what the monetization was going to be. Turns out, with media, I don't know if there really is with digital. It's tough, man, and there are a bunch of case studies, not just about cannabis, but what was clear to me as an entrepreneur was that there was a demand for information about what was going on with cannabis, and there was a value to providing it. And so then the question is, how do you connect those dots? What's your role in doing that? So, for me, putting this blog out without much direction, doing some sporadic videos, randomly just played the "my parents are lesbians" card, which is also true, and got an interview with Melissa Etheridge, randomly, which was pretty cool. So she was doing CBD wine at the time, to tell you how far things have come,
Right.
how long ago that was. So
I remember that interview, that soundbite.
yeah, and I was like, holy, I was like, wow,
Yeah,
this
it's
is
like
super legit.
Yeah. Come to my window, dude.
Exactly. And she's like, she was so cool talking about her advocacy. And, we talked about like advocating as a parent, and like how she kind of used her platform and all that. So, I think it is important, like the access part, like if you're sincere and you care and you show up, nobody's going to run you out of the room. And this idea of like the cannabis community being, for specific people, is something we need to get over. The idea of like
bullshit.
People are trying to hold on to it, and it's like respect. You have to respect and you have to acknowledge it. If you're smart, the people who've been doing it are the ones who are going to be successful. You want to work with them, and they might be a little rougher around the edges, but you want to know what they know. And guess what? Everybody else is coming no matter what, like as far as competition. We saw what happened with CBD, and kind of the hemp industry and that roller coaster. So
still
there's
happening.
gonna be a lot more.
Still flood. Still new brands reaching out to CannaPlanners weekly, like trying to get in. And that's great. And like that's what it should be about. But would you like in soundbite form the top 3? I feel like we're going to get to this, and I have in soundbite form the top 3 mistakes that I made that led to, the downfall of, going from Heady, Vermont, which, was a pretty popular platform and event service and successful. Well, let's get there, cowboy.
Okay.
We don't even know what Heady, Vermont is yet. So we're here. We are. We're young. What's that?
I said, just don't want to skip on the red meat, Will. I want to give the people what they want here. So
let's set it up a little bit, partner. So here you are. You may even you're a young, fresh-faced dude, maybe a little still bald. Okay. Bald. You've got some video skills. This is exactly what I mean, of figuring out what you can do, what practical skills you have, and then where you can apply them to the things that actually interest you, because that makes those skills infinitely more, awesome. So at what point, and you're writing this blog, at what point do you figure out that there is something happening here? At what point do you meet Monica?
Right. I mean, so you're right. Like we were doing this thing in 2015, the summer through the fall. I was doing these little videos and kind of blogging, and wasn't really going anywhere. I had an email newsletter list, but I knew that wasn't my strength. And I knew I didn't have the tech skills, especially to do that, and really try to grow it. I was trying to just like, again, all this work and not a ton of traction. So I was going to these events, and I met Monica at one of these events where I was shooting video, and she was a digital, media person doing copywriting and all this stuff. And we lived in the same neighborhood, so there was like an easy, natural connection. And I got to know her and her partner, Judd, a little bit, and, just kind of pitched her and said like, look, I want to do this blog and take it to the next level. And I think it'd be successful. I don't have the technical skills to do that, and she also not only had the technical skills, but as running a website, but, she was a photographer, do copy editing. So it was kind of like
she can make things in addition to like just the day-to-day, the dissemination of content. She could make it look good. She had a skill set. She could, she was She had an eye for
and
those
had
sorts of
enough,
things.
and was successful enough that she was able to, make the initial investment into Hetty Vermont, and to, we both kind of just bootstrapped it with our time. Um,
Yep.
but that kind of combination of skill sets of my writing and access to information, and
So
all
let's
this,
talk
and
about,
her,
let's actually
content
hang
production.
on to this for just 1 second, because it's like one of the most fascinating things that I get to talk to people about, which is the co-founder relationship and how, uh, and the duality of it. It's almost always impossible to do anything on your own. Like, you have to have partners who have, uh, you know, talents that can not only mirror yours, but they have to be as passionate about the idea. They have to be, let me see if I lost you. Yeah.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah,
All right. I can turn down
such a thing.
the.
No, it's not you. It's me.
I was gonna say, I don't know if I can change the resolution on the video to.
No. Don't sweat it. So what I was saying is this co-founder relationship is such an important one, because there's very few instances of people being able to do everything that it takes to start not only a business, but a successful business that does things like pays salaries and, like, is sustainable, is an actual business. It's really hard for people to do these things on their own. um, and a lot of times it involves a co-founder relationship. um, Finding those people who are not only as passionate, but have the corresponding skills that you need to get it done is also very challenging. So I want to know a little bit more about that, because, again, as I alluded to in the beginning of this, ultimately it didn't work out. Hetty Vermont, unfortunately, doesn't really exist anymore. It's not a source of news for people locally, anymore, which is a shame. But I want to know, like, at what point did you know it was the right relation? At what point did you know that it was right? And then what was the turning point? And I know we don't have to get into any
Yeah,
specifics
yeah.
or anything like that, but I'm just curious. Like, I guess I'm more interested in, like, that emotion of confronting what probably to you was the obvious.
Yeah, I mean, that's, well, when I knew when I knew it was a good fit, it
Yep.
seemed like even all the other factors you didn't mention, like, do your schedules align? Do your work
Right.
styles align?
Yeah.
I mean, for us, we both had studios within, like 100 yards of each other and lived on the same block. Like, it was literally some outlier shit, which all seemed like a good sign.
Yep.
And just personality wise, like, I really thought, we got along great. And ultimately, it was interesting, because one of the things was Monica was interested in, I think, getting involved in growing with a lot of our friends. Like a lot of other people, she was like, we want to get involved, we have skills, we like weed, we know how to do whatever. And that was part of my pitch, was like, hey, let's team up on this. For the information source, we're going to have all the information. So if we want to get in the business directly, sort of that helped make that partnership happen. So,
So she
I
was
think
she was equally excited about sort of finding her own foot in the door for a potential cannabis industry.
well, and
And
she had Hetty Vermont was originally like just like going to be a merch hustle. So she had this domain name, and she had a bunch of domain names, and that was like one of her ideas, and it was, brilliant. She was way ahead. So she had a ton of these domain names, and Hetty Vermont was like, it was on mugs, and she had some t-shirts. And so I think she was kind of just trying to do a good little, merch business originally, and use that awesome name. So we kind of, that was part of the partnership, was, Hetty Vermont would be the name, and then I'd bring, sort of the content production. And then ultimately, the events, and sort of that's part of one of the, one of the hard concrete lessons out of this is like, no matter how much you get along and like each other and working together is fun and like it was meaningful work. And, we're both definitely equally passionate. Like I was always out there as the spokesperson, I think just because of, my personality and, public speaking and it being easier for me. But, we were definitely always equally passionate and, especially in the beginning, investing so much of our time and sweat equity together, where it'd be like, we were literally like setting up the tables.
Yeah.
And then after the first event, it was like, all right, she's like, all right, I'm done setting up the tables. It's time to hire somebody. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm still going to be setting up these tables. So no, so it was kind of just the fundamentals, I was
grow, I
pretty
mean, that's
naive,
part of it, right? Is eventually the business grows. The co-founders need to take on new, different responsibilities and be able to understand, where to put the old ones or who to assign the old ones to. It's such a challenging thing, especially as you grow like you did. So,
well, and here's the difference between having a good idea and having a good business, right? Or the idea of being good at something and turning it into a business, right? I mean, I think that's what we figured out, that we were good at it. And Heady Vermont as a news source, as an organizing mechanism, right? I mean, we kind of both had social goals. I mean, and I know that was a lot of it for me, and part of why I personally wasn't as interested in the boring parts, in the fundamentals, which, I wish I had been more, understanding in the past. Right. But,
you're a boots on the ground dude.
Yeah. But
I want to talk about
like,
that. I want
you
to talk
have to
about
be
that
able
growth.
to answer a few at any stage in the business, right? Like, you have to be able to answer a few fundamental questions about like, how does this company make money now? What are assets and liabilities? How are we going to grow in the future? Who's the next person that we're going to add? Or how are we going to grow? Or even like, when are we going to pay ourselves based on what? All that kind of stuff. So, that's one of the big takeaways is that if you can't answer those questions, it doesn't matter how good you are at anything, whether it's growing, making media, doing events,
right?
All that. Like it sucks. It's a boring lesson to find out in a difficult way.
Well, what I was going to say is it usually most people I think have a little longer to figure that out. So what I was going to ask is, you being you and Monica being faced with, larger decision making, much bigger decisions, bigger responsibilities. It happened fairly quickly in the scheme of things, right? For what I'm saying is a lot of business people have years to figure out how to scale into this. It's something that they grow into. You guys found success fairly quickly. It still took a couple years, but you gained an audience. You were able to grow your online presence very quickly. In addition to the fact that you started, once I think you kind of were writing the business plan as you guys were running the business, right? So at first you thought it was maybe traditional revenue sources for a media company, but then as you alluded to, these events started happening. And I can remember being at the first event, like the very first event, when there was, at the Skinny Pancake, when there was maybe, 15 to 20 people there. And then all the way, a year and a half later to NECAN, which there was, I don't know, 50 businesses, 120 businesses, and a few thousand people going through. So what I want to get to is like, that's a crazy amount of growth, in addition to having to kind of figure out whole other industries. Like you weren't just a media company now. You weren't just writing content or managing a newsletter. You are now putting on events, which is logistically it's mind-boggling. I wouldn't even know where to start. I imagine you didn't really either. Take me through that. Like I said, like 20 people one day, 18 months later, a few thousand people. Like, what's the logistics there? Like, how did that work for you guys? When did you realize that, like, oh, this is a thing?
Yeah, man. I mean, even that first event, I think it was like 420, like 2016. We had a little panel of speakers up there, and we were still just a media company, and we were just selling information, right? And then it kind of coincided with the rise of CBD. I mean, we didn't really anticipate that and how big it was going to be. And all of a sudden, there was an industry that had a reason, to get together commercially. There weren't CBD stores back in the day, which
Right.
is, it's not that long ago, but
Yeah.
you're right. We didn't know we were an events company until, we were already,
Your third event.
yeah. And then, well, by the time I think we were like a legit events company, we were three companies operating at once, rather than maybe being more focused on either the events or the membership or the media. So, yeah, I mean, we got people together almost like as a party, as a social gathering, as a political thing. And then, we went the next event, we did like a CBD farmers market. And honestly, we had a conversation. It was like, okay, there are these CBD companies, they have no place to sell their stuff. Like, let's literally make the market, And so
Yeah.
it's pretty cool that like that was literally a conversation. We're like, okay, it's a farmers market. Like, this is pretty easy. And shout out Melinda Moulton. We rented out the train station, and like, the demand was pretty big, and we weren't selling tickets to the public, but it was like we hand painted a sign and put it on the train station. We had like 20 vendors, and we had demand for more. And so we went from like 20 vendors to then like 75 vendors to then like 150 vendors or whatever it was at the last NECAN. Within, yeah, literally, like you said, about 18 months. I mean,
Yeah.
we
It
didn't
was
get in,
quick growth.
we didn't get together, when we started Heady Vermont. Like, again, CBD hemp not really wasn't a huge thing. It was kind of just on the cusp, and then it blew up here. So, literally, Hemp Fest was like, we want to do some sort of festival. We're not going to call it Cannabis Fest. We'll call it Hemp Fest. We mean CBD. Maybe there's some ganja there in the parking lot. Who knows?
There
But
was.
I was still gigging at, this is the sign of the times. I was still working at Burke.
Yeah.
Shout out to them, man. And like, unfortunately, tragic situation with EB5 led to some more creative, opportunities with new management there at the ski resort. And they let us put on a CBD hemp event like way before it was cool, and they trusted us to do it.
Yeah.
And those first two Hemp Fest, dude, were just like such crazy events. And you knew it at the event with the vibe. And when Seth Crawford came out, and then just like absolutely everything started blowing up with hemp and Vermont. So a lot of it was right place, right time,
Yeah,
as far
definitely.
as being talking to cannabis people as CBD blew up too. So, but I don't think we ever start an events business. And then membership of, I sort of brought that into the fold from a Chamber of Commerce perspective, right? I mean, I had been part of this cohort that started the Burlington Young Professionals group, and like really had spent like at this point, looking back, an embarrassing amount of time, doing the young professional thing and kind of starting those groups and working at chambers. So I knew that business, and I knew kind of how it worked with events, having members and having membership and having businesses that gave affinity benefits to members. So that seemed like a way for us to grow and evolve the business and kind of be able to support, paying people to edit a newsletter, paying freelance writers, donating our own time to do photography or video or writing or whatever else. So,
Right.
I think ultimately by the end, I was describing it as like three different businesses. There was a
Yeah.
media business, there was an events business, and then there was a membership business. And I do think there was like, maybe some magical formula where they all work together. But, I think at some point, like not having that foundational stability, not having that kind of clear plan, and, not having that communication, I think even between founders as far as like, where are things going? And so,
Yeah.
we did work with an outside business coach, and do some mediation like fairly early on. Because I did have questions, and, it was a great like communicative relationship, that was open, because we were both investing a ton of our own time in there and being like, when's it going to happen? How do we get paid to do any of this stuff?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we did talk to another a business coach and consultant, and they gave us some advice, and we tried to follow some of it, and that
It's
at
hard.
least
It's work. It's definitely.
well,
I mean, it's a relationship beyond the business side of it. It's important to remember that
founder
there's
like that.
emotions. Yeah, there's emotions at play. There's pride
Well,
in
right, and
some
it's like,
instances. Yeah.
well, and it's like if you're, and it's like if you're friends with people, if you get along, like if you party together, like all of this stuff, that comes into the mix too. So I think it's helpful for co-founders to have somebody from the outside come in and give them some perspective and ask them these questions, because like you can kind of get in your own bubble and you're just insulated in like what your business is doing and how people are reacting, that maybe you don't have the clear discipline and the plan to be like, all right, here's what we're doing, then we're doing this, then we're doing that. The budget is this for this, it's that for that. And sort of that. So
Yeah.
that's a
It's
business
important.
lesson that's, yeah, and
Yeah,
I
it's
mean, that's
important.
a lesson that's more universal than about cannabis, but
Absolutely, of course.
because we found some success early on as far as like at least having cool events and having a lot of people come out. And I think in part I was always more motivated by trying to do cool shit and being at like this cutting edge of all this transition happening in Vermont,
Yeah.
than making money. And I still made myself some benchmarks along the way, and was like, if after X amount of time I haven't made this much money, or like if I've lost this much money over X amount of months or years, then I need to reassess more seriously and or move on. So,
Well, let's talk about that day, because I remember it vividly. But I'd be like, this is not something that I can even fathom, right? So the idea of not only putting so much energy into a thing, but that energy turning into yielding very positive results. For context, for people, for the 3 people listening right now, for context, the amount of businesses that came out of these events is insane. I would love for there to be a study somewhere down the road that shows the economic impact that the Vermont NECANs, the Hemp Fests, specifically the events that you put on, the economic impact that had. Because
job creators, motherfuckers.
CannaPlanners is one of those businesses, right? And so anyway, like I can just understand. I can put myself in your shoes up until that moment, right? Like effort, like every waking hour, finding some modicum of success, whatever, however you define that, whatever it is, it's like you're comfortable, whatever. But ultimately, you had this realization. You both did. It's obvious that this just wasn't going to work, and despite the momentum of this thing, that this partnership just wasn't going to work out. Take me to that day. Again,
I mean,
without like getting too into it, I'm just
no,
curious about.
no, of course.
I guess here's what I want to get at, Eli. Is like there's people who are listening to this who might be in a co-founder relationship, or might be thinking that failure isn't in any capacity isn't an option, right? And that I want to break that glass.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like by the time you get to that point, like right? I mean, people talking about it when they get divorced, like they know long before that enough things have happened, that you feel like it's probably not going, gonna be okay. And I mean, for me, I just felt like we had I left right after we did the second Vermont Cannabis Convention, or shortly after that, and that whole thing, I mean, even before we got the partnership with NECAN, and we still did our own thing with HempFest, which was so much fun. So you knew kind of the whole backstory with even getting that contract with NECAN and all the drama there. And we did it this first year, and it was like went off, and then we scaled up crazy, and that went off so well. That second, that NECAN 2019 was killer. And I just wasn't really that happy after after doing it and didn't feel super positive about the future. And I was like, this is probably the peak, as far as where things are going to be. And if I'm not feeling positive about the future, then it's time to consider other options. And, I had also sort of hit like the 3-year mark where it was like, all right, this amount of time has passed. And like, at some point, people are who they are, myself included, especially. And it's like, if I want to do this, or if I see this in this way and this person sees in this other way, and we've had all these other, different business coaches, and sort of discussions and, and a lot of frank conversations and candid conversations. So like you kind of know when it's over, and, you do the mental scenario of what you would do, on your own or what else. And to be honest, I felt like I was satisfied and fulfilled with what I had done with Heady Vermont. And a lot of it was the politics had changed as far as other things that were going on.
Right.
The advocacy mandate changed a lot after legalization. That was something that really united everybody together. And then tax and regulate, it's inherently, they're going to be winners and losers, and they're like inherently self-interest. You care a lot more about what the advertising restrictions are than Farmer Joe does about how much the grow license is going to cost. Like
Right.
Our priorities are not going to be the same politically. So, I felt like it was, for me, I had done all the things and paid all the dues, and was like, it wasn't really gonna change. And so, we just had a good conversation, and about sort of the agreements that we had, and sort of the way the business was structured wasn't easy to sort of split up. It was kind of like an all or nothing deal. And so we ended up getting in this weird sort of ownership limbo scenario where, the company's still sort of split up, even though it's not really doing anything now, and can't really be sold without the other person's permission. So, I sort of knew at the time, I knew what the worst case consequence was going to be from sort of the financial scenario, as far as like all this work that's been done is going to be worth, nothing. But the entire time where I got involved during, like, that was just one of the ethics checks that I had, was like, is this fun? Am I enjoying it? Is this meaningful? Like if I'm finding meaning in this time, and feel good about this work and like, what I'm doing, and I feel like it's, something that like fulfills me and I feel good about and proud about, then like not making money isn't a huge deal.
Totally. I think that's a really mature way of looking at it, because like I said, like I don't know that I would have been able to handle it in a similar fashion. I think that like there's so much emotion at play. Just, you pour your heart and soul into something, and then, you ultimately have to make a decision on what's best for yourself. And the whole time, if you're me, you've been thinking what's best for the company. You know what I mean? What is
right?
You've been putting yourself second or third.
Right. And you do, and that is really like, at some point, like sustainability is about like human beings as well. Right. Yeah. So it's like about like people being happy, and wanting to keep doing it. So, that is really part of the equation. And like, if you're not happy, doing it, or you don't see a positive, way forward, even just from like a managerial standpoint, like if people don't feel like they have room to grow, or they're not invested in the company mission anymore, or they're not on the same page about what that is, you're going to plateau at some point.
Right.
So, it was definitely tough. And honestly, like we spent so much time together, like, you spend so much time with somebody building a company, and like, we were really good friends and all that. So, but
it's difficult, man. And that's what the point I want to get across is like, as challenging as it sounds, it is. And the reason is because, again, there's so much being put into this thing, and sometimes it just doesn't go the way that you hope it does.
But you also, you have to think about for yourself when you get into a business, you have to consider all scenarios, and consider, like, part of that is, what's your definition of success?
Yeah.
And like, what's going to make you feel validated?
Yeah.
And like, and even just to be able to, like, in those moments where that are peaks, be able to, like, step back and be like, holy shit, this is really cool.
100%. And I think that's an interesting point, because what I project onto you is that, while it was difficult, ending that chapter of your life, I'm sure very difficult, that allowed you to focus inward and, focus on what's next, which is, let's go there. So,
Well,
like,
and yeah. I mean, plus, like, everything that happened still happened. So, like,
yeah,
no reason to feel bad about, about any of it. Even though, so that's just something for people to keep in mind.
That's not even what I mean to say. What I mean to say is, like, in the moment, like, it's impossible to just as a human, it's impossible to think that, like, there wasn't some, it can be shitty sometimes, right? But
Yeah.
but what's also important is figuring out, like, as an entrepreneur, it's like, what's next and how do I get there? And for you, it was actually kind of looking in the rearview mirror a little bit. Vermont Awana still existed, and it was an entity that you could revive, and now had the perspective of someone who had done all these amazing things, and you could refocus back on what you originally thought was important, which is your backyard, right?
Yeah. I mean, and for me, like, I was able to use that experience to be able to do some consulting work, because, like, I knew what the laws were. I had been studying them. I knew the political dynamics.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, even as Vermont Awana has been getting going, being able to remain engaged in cannabis, like, as a consultant, because I can do research, I can do market analysis, I can use those skills, I can be marketing and, work for Trace, something like that, and help get hemp farmers signed up. Right. So, once you're in that community, you can stay in that community and do something else.
Totally.
Right. I mean, that's
this is
something
the power of the network. This is the most important entrepreneurial skill I can, like, say to anybody, is, like, never forget where you came from, because those networks are always there. Always. And
I mean,
they miss you.
I ended up getting hired. One of the companies I got hired for, I literally had coached one of the founders when he was in high school, and had come full circle, where now he was writing, signing my paychecks.
Yeah.
But that was because, we had done events, and, they knew that I knew what I was talking about and who the players were, and all that. So, it is important to, if you want to be involved in the cannabis industry, like, you might be doing something different temporarily, or you might have some totally unexpected opportunities. So for me, being able to just survive and stay in it, like, I was so invested. I wasn't going to leave the cannabis industry, like, obviously.
No.
But I had always thought, sort of during, and after Heady Vermont, about kind of what are some other things that are happening in cannabis? What are the parts of this that I like the most? What do I want to be sharing with people? And, for me, the events business, like, bringing people together, doing some media, just because I like writing, even though it's hard. I like helping to clarify complicated topics, or speak truth to power, or, try to bring people together, or help clarify things, which is still a huge issue, not only with cannabis, but with all politics. Like, it's hard for people to just show up and vote isn't really enough, especially
super confusing.
Yeah. And especially if you're trying to be involved in, like, if you care about how much it costs per square foot for a greenhouse license, like, it's probably not, it might not be easy for you to find out who has that information, or how to find that out, or, whatever. So, that's just part of that's part of the part of it that I always liked, and for me, like, I never lost that cannabis community, people who I was friends with before, during, after Heady Vermont, and that was the thing, is like you build so many cool relationships that you can sort of move around. So
Absolutely.
Vermont for me, I mean, part of the idea of how to
Mhm.
of how to grow it, right? And this is where you go back to what we talk about a lot, right? As far as having a vision, beyond Vermont and beyond your own, backyard over here, is sort of for me, Vermont is right. It's a small place. We've got a limited population, but we have a big brand. We have a big brand,
Yeah.
and cannabis will be nationally distributed at some point. And in the meantime, a lot of people come to Vermont, and I know this because guess what? This entire time I've been a bartender and a waiter and a cook, and worked in a ski area, and had like 2 or 3 other jobs like every other Vermonter, and have
Right.
just been gigging it out. So I know what the tourism industry is in Vermont. I know how our economy works in this state, and it's people coming in here and paying for specialty foods, for really cool experiences. And cannabis is one of those things. It always has
Absolutely.
been, verbal meme with the astronaut, with the gun behind his head. It always has been. Like,
Yeah.
guess what? We're not going to invent smoking weed at skier resorts in Vermont. Like, that's not a new thing, no matter what company's doing it in 3 or 4
Brilliant.
years legally. Yeah, I know. Somebody's going to pioneer this. Who knows?
Totally.
Vacationweed.com, like that'll be a thing. Right. So,
Snatch it up. We'll talk to me a little bit about, so Vermontawana sort of filling
yeah, I mean, we want
some of the reporting gaps that Heading Vermont's left behind. But
I'm doing some media. I'm doing media because there is still information to get out, and also to do events.
So take me there. Take me to the post-pandemic life where we're all hanging out together.
Exactly. I mean, again, that's part of the deal with timing, right? Like,
yeah.
We are very fortunate in Vermont to have a lot of access to vaccines. I know we're up there, most vaccinated states. So people and our economy here runs on tourism. Like, we need people to visit. We need people to spend money. We need to be able to go out. We need people to be able to travel here, all this.
Totally.
So like all of these things are coinciding to lead towards a huge summer. And people who come to Vermont, people who go anywhere, whether cannabis is legal or, legal to a different degree, however much THC is allowed in your bud, Delta 9, that is. Don't get me started on Delta. Don't get me started on Delta 8. Will, that's a whole other podcast.
I wouldn't dare.
We know that like cannabis has always been part of everything that people do when they travel, when they do recreation, all that. So
I think there's so many just cottage industries about to spring up as legalization happens in different states, as new social reform happens surrounding cannabis happens in other states. So this idea of cannabis tourism is obvious. I mean, it's happening. I can remember seeing, something on CNN years ago about Airbnbs and cannabis, like in Oregon or something like that. But anyway, like, this is inevitable. You're right. This is going to happen. How are you capitalizing on it?
For me, it's all about, again, connecting the Vermont community, giving them a platform, and then bringing them to an even wider audience. So for me, Vermontawana is about what's happening in Vermont. That's part of the benefit I'm providing to the readers in Vermont. But it's also about what's happening where people who are visiting to Vermont can tap in, to where to go to buy CBD, what events to go to, Airbnbs that are 420 friendly, things like that. So I think a lot of it is going to be event based as far as the future of Vermontawana in the near term, and even just having networking events, getting sort of Vermont people back together, and being able to sort of bring everybody who's been there and people who are new and people who want to be involved in the future, tax and regulate adult use market, sort of getting them together. And then hopefully as things progress, knock on wood, as it becomes more and more comfortable to have larger and larger groups, be able to get back into the festival scene, into the trade show scene, and really be scaling back up and being able to do some of those cool things. So for me in the short term, I'm doing a seed swap here at the end of the month. We're doing our spring swap. It's going to be a huge spring show for us in the years to come. And,
Well, this is
because
going to
of
come
the
out in the
laws.
summertime. So this is a thing. We're talking about a thing of the future, but it was a humongous success.
Okay,
Eli
okay.
knocked it right out of the park. There were so many people. It was so
Totally
safe. It was so COVID safe.
didn't
It
get
was
arrested.
crazy.
Yeah. It was insane. We gave everybody got vaccine clinic at the event. It was crazy they did that.
Whoa! Who saw that coming? Well, Eli, if
no,
anybody,
man. So all right, good.
if anybody is
Good point,
poised to
but
do this, it's for sure you. You know, you have the experience
but
to.
for me,
Yeah.
part of it too is the concrete example, like COVID. Last year, I was thinking about this and how to manifest it and make it real. And to me, farm tours were always something I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Just because I knew these farmers who had so much information, who have been growing it, and have access to this beautiful landscape and this beautiful place. And so I realize how fortunate we are, and to be able to kind of share that with people, that's such a cool experience to be able to
Yeah.
bring people to a cannabis farm, even if it's CBD hemp, with a beautiful panorama, talk to a farmer, be able to buy legal cannabis products from them directly, also buy some of their farm products, take pictures with plants, do all that. And then go back to your Airbnb, go out to dinner and keep doing what you were doing, and be able to add that to your experience. So for me, it's two parts. It's about what visitors to Vermont and what consumers want. They want the experience. They want something beyond just the product in the bottle, no matter how awesome the packaging is,
Absolutely.
or how great the marketing. Being able to give them that experience. And then for our producers who are, again, these are personal friends of mine, a lot of these people in kind of this network that I want to continue to grow out and build, being able to put that organic, who's the small scale craft, whatever. Here you go. Here's Bennett off Peace. Here's Meredith at Magic Man. Here's all of these different people at all of these different sort of levels. So to me, that's where this leads to longer term. Vermontawana growing as a brand, and ultimately just being something that brings the Vermont cannabis experience to people who come here, and then ultimately brings the Vermont cannabis experience beyond our borders longer term as the future allows. So, I do have growth plans to get into plant touching in some capacity or the other. I myself, this is my 5th year on the registry as a hemp grower, which is kind of crazy. And that's sort of been part of my deal all along, is like, pandemic happened, can always get better at growing. I've been fortunate to be able to even just be able to get manual labor, work on a hemp farm, and be able to learn more and advance those skills. So, those are the kinds of things that are out there. And yeah. It's like, you have to take the free stuff that's out there, right? There's knowledge out there. There's education out there.
The experiences are there. It's about finding them.
Totally.
Well, at the beginning of this, I kind of asked you, why Vermont? But I think if there's anything that this conversation has shown, it's why Vermont. It's, you are clearly passionate about your home, and it shows. And I think that Vermont, especially the Vermont cannabis community, is better for it. And Eli, we appreciate you, all of us in the Vermont cannabis space, and we all look forward with very eager eyes at what the future holds for you, and we can't wait to see what you do, man. Thank you so much for talking to me, and I'm sure this will be one of several chapters of Common SENSimilla where we have you back and we talk about where you're at now. Where's that weed brand at now?
I love it, man.
Eli, tell the people listening where they can find you.
Awesome. You can find me at Vermontawana. That's Vermont, IJUANA. Like Vermont Tijuana, right? Not like Vermont marijuana. The name was invented back when marijuana was racist, but less widely known to be. So it's an anachronism to before the all cannabis times and the cannabis only times. So
it's what we call on the nose.
That's right. So Vermontawana. on all the social media, including YouTube. Definitely look for us on there. More videos coming out, and vermontawana.com. We've got some fun projects coming up, and including hemp tours, 420 friendly lodging, some other media projects. So we
Awesome.
appreciate people supporting and tuning in. And the newsletter subscription is the best way to get information. Comes out twice a month, so you can find out on vermontawana.com how to get involved with that. And maybe Patreon
right
in the future. Yeah, by the time this comes on, maybe we'll have been kicked off Patreon. So we'll see.
We can only hope. We can only hope. We will perhaps link that in the description below, provided you haven't been kicked off by the time this goes live. Eli, thank you so much for your time. I've always admired you professionally as a person. You're an amazing dude. A big part of why I'm in the cannabis space is because of you. So thank you so much. Eli Harrington, Vermontawana. That has been this episode of SENSimilla. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.